It's the Week 11 wide receiver preview for fantasy football. We did the running backs yesterday. Link down below. We are doing the wide receivers, meaning we're going game by game, every game of the NFL slate for Week 11, and talking specifically about wide receivers, whether or not I put them in your lineup, whether I sit their ass down, whether they're even worth owning at this point of thy season. All right, Week 11, this is make or break point. This is playoff times. This is avoid last place consequence time, if you know what I'm saying. All right, so let's jump into the Thursday night football game. We've got Washington. We've got Philly. All right, Washington is in Philadelphia. Philly's been red hot. 49.5-point over. Under. Philly is 3-point favorites at home. Philly's defense is becoming as good as any defense in the NFL at this point. They've been red hot. As it relates to Philly, one, of course, you're starting A.J. Brown. Two, of course, you're starting Devontae Smith. Nobody else you need to worry about on that side of the ball. Now, Jalen Hurts, if he goes over one passing yard, if he has one single passing yard on Thursday Night Football, you win your bet on Underdog Fantasy, okay? They have a free square absolutely cheeked up for you for Thursday Night Football. That game is tonight. They will have another free square for Sunday or Monday, so whenever you end up watching this video, they will have one. If it is not Jalen Hurts, it is somebody else. Literally, all you got to do is go download the Underdog Fantasy app with our code BDGE, deposit $10. They're going to get you a deposit bonus on the app, and they're also going to give you this free square, right? So Jalen Hurts, 1 yard. A.J. Brown, probably a lot more than that. Devontae Smith, also a lot more than that, right? Move over to Washington. Terry McLaurin, of course, has been good enough this year that he's an every week must-start player with Jaden Daniels the way that he is playing. Underneath him, Noah Brown is kind of interesting. He had a letdown week last week after being a waiver wire dude that I think people were excited about. He is running by far and away the second most routes on the team. We've seen him be good on an NFL field before, like last year with C.J. Stroud. He had some pop games. So despite him coming off of a bad game last week, I don't want to be too heavily focused on recency bias. So I think Noah Brown is a possible player for you this week. When we look at the players are on bye. In Week 11, we've got the Giants, so you have Malik Neighbors, maybe Wan'Dale Robinson. You have the Cardinals, so Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe Michael Wilson. You have the Bucks, obviously you've been without Mike Evans, you've been without Chris Godwin, maybe Jalen McMillan, and you have the Panthers, so maybe Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, Adam Thielen, whatever. Not actually a huge dent to the wide receiver position from a fantasy perspective related to the running backs, at least. Again, we did this same exact video for running backs yesterday, so go check that out when you have a little split second. Moving off Thursday Night Football, we've got Jacksonville, we've got Detroit. Detroit, 13.5-point favorites at home in this one. On paper, of course, you're starting Amon-Ra St. Brown. You're almost definitely going to start Jameson Williams. This is one of those matchups, right? As 2 touchdown favorites, this could be a game where David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs end up seeing 40 touches combined, and Jared Goff throws the ball 15, maybe 20 times. So if you want to go big brain and you don't want to start Jameson Williams, I can understand that. I don't think that's the avenue that I would go down. Jacksonville is one of, if not the worst pass defenses in the NFL at this point. On the flip side, you got Jacksonville playing with Mac Jones, which is a huge downgrade to all parties involved, of course. Parker Washington is unplayable. Gabe Davis is unplayable. Brian Thomas Jr. is bordering on that. I think if we see one more game like we've seen the last couple weeks, he might also be playing under 100%, so maybe he gets healthier, but Mac Jones is just not the deep ball thrower that Trevor Lawrence is, which hurts Brian Thomas Jr. a lot, because up to this point, Brian Thomas Jr.'s accuracy numbers in terms of the rate at which the throws to him have been accurate, have been extremely, extremely high. You're just not going to get those with Mac Jones. So everyone needs to be super downgraded. I think you could start BDJ as a flex because he's so talented on his own, but there are definitely a ton of options that I would be fine starting over him. Also, one more thing I should note is Marshawn Lattimore, who was newly acquired by Washington, will not be playing on Thursday Night Football, which is an obvious upgrade to A.J. Brown and Devontae. I was kind of surprised because I figured they went out and got him. Obviously, their pass defense just needs help in general, but you kind of figured you go get a dude like that. So in these in-division matchups, you could have him play against A.J. Brown and CeeDee Lamb, etc. But it ain't happening this week. Going down the list, we got Green Bay, 6.5-point favorites on the road against Chicago, 41.5-point total here. Weather is something to absolutely keep an eye on. It could affect the passing game. Caleb Williams is something to keep an eye on. He could affect the passing game as well. Same impact, him and weather right now. They are switching things up. Shane Fraudrin is out of the picture. They have a dude who's the new OC or the new play caller, who was also the dude who took over in Carolina last year when their regime got fired. So I don't really have a lot of confidence that this is going to fix anything. Their offensive line is completely broken right now. They had 3 starters that were out last week, got a 4th one injured. 2 of them are not practicing as of Wednesday. 2 of them are, so they should get some players back, but it does not mean that they are at full strength. It's just been a bad offensive line all year. Green Bay's passing defense, as you can see, there's just a lot of red and orange across the board here. Both of them are top 10 in coverage rank per PFF. Both of them are top 8 teams in EPA per pass rank. Fantasy points per game allowed to the wide receiver. Chicago is very, very high up there. So it's a tough matchup on both sides of the ball. I like the Green Bay pass catchers a lot more than Chicago, obviously. I don't know that anybody is startable in Chicago's passing game. I put out this tweet last week, and this was prior to another dud game by the Chicago Bears coming off of a 3-point offensive performance against the Patriots, that it just doesn't get any worse than what we saw last week. But you're never getting consistent performance out of 2 players in this offense, let alone you're rarely getting a big performance out of one offensive player outside of DeAndre Swift in this offense, let alone 2. Like, you'll never get it. So you're playing whack-a-mole here, and I just think there are a million different better starts that you could have outside of DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, any of those guys. You are absolutely just playing Russian roulette if you're putting them into your lineup. On the flip side, Jaden Reed, I think he's just been good enough that even if the target volume's not there, he is a big play waiting to happen. We saw him have a big game last time they were on the field. They're coming off their bye, so everyone should be a little bit healthier, Jordan Love included. Not a great spot again because Chicago's pass defense is so good. They'll be without Jaquan Brisker again, so some of their secondary is still banged up. But Jaden Reed is a must-start for sure. Romeo Doubs, I think, is definitely someone that you can have in your lineup. Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks, especially if this is a bad weather game, they get a pretty significant downgrade, and they're more risky flex plays than anything else. Next up, you got the Rams, 4.5-point favorites on the road in New England, 43.5-point total here. For the Rams, you are starting Cooper Kupp, you are starting Puka Nacua. I think you could play Demarcus Robinson. He obviously had a bad week last week, but the Patriots are not a defense that you are worried about, and Robinson's just that boomer bust type of player where putting him in your lineup, you could get 3 points, you could get, 23 points because he is a long, deep threat touchdown scorer type player. I would imagine this is going to be a pretty heavy Kyren game, so I don't know how many pass attempts we get out of Stafford that don't go to Kupp or Puka, so I think that's just another thing to kind of keep your eye on. Robinson's definitely more of a desperate flex play, but I think he's not completely off the startable list here. On the flip side of things, for the Patriots, like, you're starting Ramondre, you're starting Hunter Henry. Pop Douglas has been severely underwhelming here, but this is a defense in LA where their pass rush is good because of Frisk and Jared Verse, but their coverage rank is 30th per PFF. Their EPA per pass rank is 22nd. Fantasy points per game allowed to the wide receiver, they are bottom 10 there, so they could definitely be had through the air. Kayshon Boutte's probably the dude to kind of keep an eye on. They're not playing Kendrick Bourne at all. They're not playing Tyquan Thornton anymore, so they are looking towards the future a little bit, and that is the combo of, like, even Jalen Polk scored a touchdown last week. Not rosterable, but Boutte has seen 6 targets in 3 consecutive games, so take that for whatever it is. Drake May has obviously brought a little bit of a pop to this offense, so if you're super desperate, I would rank them in the order of Pop Douglas, Boutte, Jalen Polk. Cleveland and New Orleans. New Orleans at home, 1.5-point favorites, 46.5-point total here. MVS was the hot name-ish on the waiver wire this week. He scored 2 touchdowns, had 3 catches on 3 targets, over 100 yards. Just some big pop plays, nothing we haven't seen from MVS before. I mean, I can't tell you anything you don't know about MVS. Like, if he connects and gets lucky, sure, you could have a ceiling game. He could catch 1 ball for 6 yards and a touchdown, 12, 13 points, whatever. He could give you 2 points. Like, we have like a 6-year sample size of MVS playing with the best quarterbacks of our generation, and more often than not, he just flops and gives you nothing. That being said, everybody is out for the Saints right now, right? Rashid, Olave. We will have to keep an eye on Cedric Wilson. I do think that actually matters a little bit for a dude like MVS. Cedric Wilson was also out in this game. Cedric Wilson was kind of playing the MVS role the week before and then got hurt. So keep an eye on practice reports for Cedric Wilson. If he's in, I'm probably out on MVS altogether. For Cleveland, things are a little bit messy here. I think this is a fantastic matchup for their passing game coming off of the bye. New Orleans has been a terrible defense all year pretty much. Obviously no more Marshawn Lattimore, so we're not worried about their secondary whatsoever. Tillman's been red hot. I think he is, a really, really strong wide receiver too. You got Jerry Jeudy, who's like a PPR low-end wide receiver 3. Same thing with Elijah Moore. I'm not really getting cute with any other Cleveland wide receivers. I think if you need to start either of those 2, you can in a pinch, but I'm not getting cute and throwing them up my lineup very far. Next up, we got Minnesota on the road, 6.5-point favorites in Tennessee, 39.5-point total here. So not expecting much of a shootout. Minnesota, of course, you're starting Jay Jeffs. Addison is just giving you fucking nothing burgers over and over and over again. He's got a couple games where he scored some touchdowns, but otherwise they're not looking at him. He's not getting high targets. They haven't had any game plans where it seems like they're going his way. So Addison becomes risky, and this is a good Tennessee pass defense that's They've gotten worse as the weeks have gone by because they've dealt with a lot of injuries, L'Jarius Sneed and some of their safety plays and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not necessarily too scared of the matchup. I'm just more nervous that like TJ Hawkinson is now back and he's getting a ton of targets. Jefferson obviously always commands his 8 to 10. So Addison's like a wide receiver 4 for me. You might need to play him. I think in a league I will end up having to play him this week. So that's unfortunate. On the flip side, Calvin Ridley is just impossible to project on a week-over-week basis. I'd imagine the Tennessee pass offense implodes this week against Minnesota, just blitzing the fuck out of them if Will Levis is under center, which I guess I expect him to be again. It's hard not to ride the hot hand with Ridley, though. It seems like as soon as he was just 0, 0, 0, 0, then it's like, let me pop for 20, let me pop for 20, let me pop for 20. Now that everybody's back in on Ridley, now he's going to disappoint us. But listen, if I have Ridley, I'm probably playing him just because he's been red hot. So he's a strong flex play, a strong wide receiver 3 with clearly a lot of upside here because Levis is really looking at nobody else but him. Next up, we got Indy. We got the Jets. Now we have Anthony Richardson back under center. They are 3.5-point dogs in New York, 43.5-point total. Obviously, again, there's just not much I could tell you that you don't already know. With Anthony Richardson under center, the passing game is not really one you want to have in fantasy. I expect them to be better now. I expect Anthony Richardson to be better with this little layoff that he had. We don't have a practice report yet as of Wednesday for the Colts. My concern would be Michael Pittman returning to the lineup. While the Jets defense, I know they've just like kind of imploded and everyone likes to kind of make fun of or talk shit to Sauce Gardner at this point, they've still allowed the single fewest fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. Their coverage rank per PFF is still number 6. Their EPA rank is number 10. I get it. They can have bad games, but they could also have great games in lockdown wide receivers. Like when you have the combo of Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed together, any given Sunday, they could lock the fuck up out of your wide receivers. So I'm not looking at this as a positive matchup by any stretch of the imagination. For the ground game, sure, JT can pop off, do your thing. But for the passing game, Anthony Richardson, I am not starting anybody outside of Josh Downs if Michael Pittman plays. If Michael Pittman does not play, Pierce and Adonai, I would much rather go in other directions. We've seen A-Rich connect with Alec Pierce on big shots down the field and have big fantasy days. Week 1 of this year, A-Rich put up like 29 fantasy points. Alec Pierce had, 20 points. We've also seen A-Rich miss Adonai Mitchell on multiple big plays this year, especially early on when he was first playing. He left, a ton of fantasy points on the field. So if he dials us in a little bit more, I wouldn't be surprised if AD Mitchell comes away with an okay, solid game. So the way I'm looking at this is A-Rich under center. If Michael Pittman Jr. plays, it makes everything too messy, and I would use Josh Downs as a wide receiver 3, but nothing more. If Michael Pittman does not play, Josh Downs still like a wide receiver 3, but I think Pierce and AD Mitchell become flex-worthy-ish if you really need them. Vegas and Miami. We've got Miami, 7-point favorites at home, 44.5-point total. The Raiders' pass defense is terrible. I would expect Miami to go super run-heavy in this game, but you're obviously starting Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle, it's a great matchup, so I probably want to try him in my lineup again as a flex, but also if you have other startable options, I am completely fine sitting Waddle at this point because he has shown nothing with Tua. He has shown nothing without Tua. Like, it just seems like an offensive game plan where Waddle is just a complete afterthought. It's Tyreek Hill, it's Devon Achane, it is Jonnu Smith's getting a bunch of plays ran up for him, so Waddle is absolutely someone that you can sit at this point, but it is a really good matchup. On the Raiders side of things, I think you definitely get Jacoby Myers into your lineup as a strong wide receiver 3 because of the volume. Otherwise, no one else in there interests me. For Baltimore in Pittsburgh, we got Baltimore on the road in Pittsburgh, 3.5-point favorites, 47.5-point over under here. Baltimore's obviously just been an absolutely gaping hole to opponents' wide receivers. So George Pickens has been a fucking god since Russell Wilson has come under center. So George Pickens is a high-end wide receiver 2. Mike Williams got 1 target, did catch it. He should play a little bit more, but he's not really someone I'm looking to get into my lineup if I don't absolutely need to. He's a desperate dude where I would play both Colts wide receivers, I think, over Mike Williams if Michael Pittman does not play in this game, which probably sounds crazy, but I think I would do that. For Baltimore, you're obviously starting Zay Flowers. Deontay Johnson's still running 2 routes a game, so you're not playing him. Rashad Bateman's played really well, but again, this is a tough matchup for the Baltimore passing game, so I'd expect a healthy dose of Derrick Henry in this one. Rashad Bateman, I think, is a wide receiver 4, and then I'm not looking anywhere else. Seattle, San Francisco, we've got 6.5-point favorite, San Francisco at home, 49.5-point total in this one. All right. We are expecting DK Metcalf back. Oh, the other thing I should mention, Kyle Hamilton got banged up last week. So when we take a look at the practice reports, keep an eye on that. That obviously changes the entire dynamic of the Baltimore defense if Kyle Hamilton is out. For Seattle, San Fran, we have Jawan Jennings completely taking over the Brandon Ayuk role. I am having no hesitation putting Deebo Samuel back out there again. He is Deebo Samuel. We have a 5-year sample size of who he is. Deebo's a top 15 wide receiver for me. Jawan Jennings at this point, like, you could argue that he should be borderline top 15. The volume is there. He had, I think, a 36% first read share last week. Came away with big production. Purdy missed him on a bunch of plays. Like, I think Jawan Jennings is going to be a real staple of fantasy lineups for the remainder of the season. So I have him as a super, super rock solid wide receiver too. Pearsall's a little bit less involved, running a fewer less. I don't fucking know. You guys know what I'm trying to say here. Pearsall is a flex play because he's a big play waiting to happen. He's a good separator. He's getting more and more involved with his team. The other thing, George Kittle tweaked his hamstring apparently, so let's keep an eye on practice reports there. If he is out, obviously that's more targets to the other playmakers in this offense. Seattle, we should expect DK Metcalf back. If DK Metcalf is back, we are going to throw him back into our lineups, of course. With DK Metcalf back, I think, and I also think Noah Fant is probably back this week as well. Begs the question, like, what happens to Lockett? What happens, more importantly, to JSN, who has kind of exploded and taken on a new role with DK Metcalf out? I'm going to be honest, I am nervous as shit for JSN when DK Metcalf returns. Like, the only time I feel like he really ever has big games or blows up is when the defense goes all out to stop DK, or DK is just not on the field. And we've just seen such a low floor for JSN. And Lockett has played very well against San Francisco. If you look at his last 5 games, the game logs for Lockett: 4 for 65 and a touchdown, 6 for 89, 3 for 30, so a little bit of a dud game, 7 for 68, 9 for 107. Like, historically, he just plays well in these division games, and I think he'll be a factor in this game. So it just makes JSN a little bit more murky. So I'm not really looking at him as a wide receiver 3 right now, even though we might be in the midst of his breakout. I still think he's more of like a flex play that, honestly, I think you could probably start some players over him if you need to. I would rank it DK, JSN, Tyler Lockett, but I think the bottom 2 are more flex worthy than anything else. Moving on to Atlanta and Denver. Now, Atlanta is on the road. They're 1.5-point dogs, 43.5-point total. This is like an immovable object, unstoppable force, whatever that saying is, where Denver's pass defense has been absolutely fucking lights out. Patrick Surtain will probably be glued to Drake London, and we saw what Surtain did last week to DeAndre Hopkins. Now, Hopkins is not the separator anymore that he was when he was younger. Probably not the separator Drake London is now. Obviously, it's a major downgrade to Drake London, which I do think opens things up for Darnell Mooney. But overall, like, they don't allow a lot of fantasy points to wide receivers. They've allowed the 4th fewest on the year to the wide receiver position, 4th best EPA per pass rank as well. It's just a tough Denver defense in a tough environment. Mile high, they are in Denver. So it's going to be a tough situation for the passing offense. They're probably going to try to run their offense through Bijan. Does anyone fucking blame them at this point in the season? No. So I think it's just a slight downgrade to that passing offense. Like, Drake London probably goes from, he's currently the wide receiver 4 on the year in fantasy. Darnell Mooney is the wide receiver 8. I don't know if people like are really tapped in and tuned into the type of production those two are actually having this year. Like, I know they're good, but like, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 8, 2 top 8 wide receivers right now, Drake London, Darnell Mooney. But in this matchup, it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as just on paper. Like, London is still, a low-end wide receiver 1, probably more of like a top 15 option. I think Darnell Mooney probably hovers between top 15 and top 20. I'm not sitting Darnell Mooney. I'm not sitting Drake London because it is a relatively condensed passing offense, and those two tend to get the targets every single week. Like, there's usually an odd man or 2 out between Kyle Pitts and Ray McLeod, but these two continuously get the good targets here. So I'm still playing them for sure, but I would probably expect a little bit of a downgrade overall. For Courtland Sutton, we've seen Bo Nix absolutely light it up with him the last 3 weeks. He is progressing and getting better and better and better every week. Ever since that 0 game that Sutton put up like a month ago, he's been red hot, and this is not a Falcons defense that you need to really worry about at this point. So Courtland Sutton is a really solid, top 20, top 24 fantasy wide receiver option right now. Moving down the list, we got KC and we got Buffalo. So Buffalo is 1.5-point favorites at home, 45.5-point total. KC, I think you look at DeAndre Hopkins, and we've just got word that Juju is actually going to be back in the lineup this week, which makes things interesting. We saw Juju have that really big game and then obviously dudded out the next week, got hurt. D-Hop had an underwhelming initial game, then a really big game the next game, and now he got locked up by Surtain last week. So we're kind of in flux about like what D-Hop really is. Now Juju comes back into the mix, so it gets a little tricky. I am not going to start Juju this week. I'm going to need to see a week with him not being the primary read here to see if he has any fantasy value. I'm relatively comfortable starting DeAndre Hopkins this week as a wide receiver 3 or a flex option, but that's the only places I'm looking at in this offense. Xavier Worthy's pretty much been droppable for like weeks at this point. On the flip side of things, we got Buffalo. Shakir is obviously a must start. Keon Coleman's not going to play. Dalton Kincaid is not going to play. Cooper's status is obviously up in the air. Now, if Cooper plays, I think both him and Khalil Shakir are really solid plays. I think Cooper's probably more of a wide receiver 3. I think Khalil Shakir has proven himself to be a wide receiver 2 here, so I'm cool with both of them in my lineup. Moving down Cincinnati, Los Angeles Chargers. We have the Bengals as 1.5-point underdogs on the road in LA, 46.5-point total here. The Chargers defense has just been, amazing this year. They are like top 5 in every statistic, both run and pass defense. Cincinnati, on the other hand, has been incredible through the air so far. Jamar Chase in your lineup. T. Higgins is trending towards playing, so he's going to be in your lineup as well. If he's out, then you're not playing any other wide receivers. Gesicki becomes interesting again, of course. For the Chargers, the wide receiver room is a little bit tricky. I will say I really like the matchup. I like the fact that they're probably going to have to score points against Cincinnati Bengals, so it makes me a lot more confident. Really like Ladd. I think he's like an every week wide receiver 3 at worst, especially in PPR. He has gone from maybe like a slot-only player to running 90 to 95% of the routes over the last bunch of weeks. He's been an every down player pretty much. Quentin Johnson came back to being a full-time player, 96% of the routes last week, which was a season high. Now his targets dipped. He only caught 2 balls, but he did catch another touchdown. So he's kind of just been getting it done one way or another. So QJ, I feel like, is a pretty solid start this week. And then you have Josh Palmer mixing in a little bit more, 63% of the routes last week. Jalen Reagor was involved a little bit. They're mixing it up, but the two consistents here have been Quentin Johnson and Ladd McConkey. And I think I would definitely go Ladd as a really solid wide receiver 3, and then Quentin Johnson as a formidable flex play. Houston-Dallas, last matchup of the week. This is Monday Night Football, and again, Underdog will have a free square for CJ Stroud as long as he throws for 1 single yard. You will win your bet on Underdog. You'll get that free square by signing up on Underdog Fantasy, link down below, using code BDGE when you deposit just $10. $10, they'll give you a deposit bonus plus the free square of CJ Stroud, okay? So with Houston-Dallas, we have Houston 7.5-point favorites in Dallas, 42.5-point over-under. With this game, I did not promise a Nico Collins return last week. I feel really, really confident that he will return this week. So Nico's in your lineup. I think Tank Dell can definitely be used as well. He's more of a wide receiver 3. He's been really, really inconsistent. I think you could play other players above him. But with Nico back on the field, I think this bodes well for just the pressure that's going to be taken off of Tank Dell. Maybe they move Tank Dell outside and move John Mechie in the slot, and he could be a little bit interesting. But Nico's in your lineup for sure. Tank Dell, I think, is suitable start this week at flex, but he's obviously a big downgrade now with Nico back in the lineup. For Dallas, you're not starting any wide receiver outside of CD, and even CD going forward rest of season with Cooper Rush or Trey Lance, whoever they end up going with week to week. Man, it's bad out there in Dallas. I'm sure CD will have his games, he'll have his plays, but realistically, if you could flip CD based on the name value still for like anything worthwhile, I think it might be time to pull the trigger there. Attaching yourself to this offense right now is just going to lead to too many floor games. Like that's the difference between being in a good offense and a bad offense. Is like, sure, CD is talented enough to have big games because he can make a big play on any given throw, but being attached to this offense just means that there will be massive floor games on a week-to-week basis like we saw last week, which will pull down the entire offense at this point. So with that being said, yeah, CD for me, realistically, dude, he's like borderline top 20 right now. Obviously, if you have a really strong team, I think there's a world where you can sit him. Obviously, he's CeeDee Lamb, and I don't want to sit him, but like we got to be realistic about the situation here and what we saw with Cooper Rush. So I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave you with that. If you want to see the running back version of this video, I did that yesterday. That will be one of the first links down below as well. Go watch that video, and thank you for hanging out with me. I love you. Smoochies.